This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
If you've been told to pull up your socks, then make sure it's a pair of TNT socks. The TNT shop is now open at tntradio.live. Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome. We didn't even have the Muckrakers little theme tune, and it's 50 years, so that threw everybody. Well, here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial issues of our time. Our mission, as always, is to provide more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to find the truth. But what's really important, we don't just ask the questions, but we question the answers with experts from around the world in their particular field. Now, today does represent the 50th show that we've done here on the Muckrakers. Time has flown by, and to celebrate that, we're going to be looking at the power of propaganda and the reason that we have to every single day question everything. Propaganda used for war is perhaps the most insidious, and we're going to look at the latest war propaganda, including against Iran, and in evidence by the US Congress addressed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and his call for a Middle East NATO. Well, today the Muckrakers is made up of the finest, the best we could find for you at such short notice as well. But it's made up of myself, Andrew Eborn, Martin J, and Dr. George Samueli. Welcome back, both of you.
Good to be here.
Nice. Good to see you. Wonderful. Now, Martin J, just to remind you, is an award-winning journalist and editor of maghrebi.org and levantis.me. His career has spanned over 30 years, which has seen him work in 50 countries for a host of big media titles. But what I love most is that on his Twitter X page, he proudly proclaims that he's been fired by all the media giants. Not here on the Muckrakers. We love him. A good journalist, but a pain in the backside is what CNN said, but not using the word backside. Dr. George Samueli, who I also have a delight of working with on a regular basis here on the Muckrakers. He's a senior research fellow at the Global Policy Institute in London. He's written for innumerable publications and is author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. Well, this week we saw the extraordinary vision of Benjamin Netanyahu addressing Congress. It was a record full speech by a foreign leader to a joint meeting of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The previous winner of the number of speeches was Winston Churchill, very different man. He made 3 speeches to Congress in 1941, 1943 and 1952. Now, the rhetoric coming out of Netanyahu was very different. He vowed to continue the war in Gaza until Israeli hostages are freed and Hamas is eradicated. But there were basically a fractured Congress. A number of Democrats, they were splintered over their support for the ongoing war in Gaza. And some, like New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they actually refused to attend Wednesday's speech. And others walked out. Now, we looked at his speech in detail in yesterday's programme, but I want to just get both of your reaction on Benjamin Netanyahu's call for a Middle East NATO, or what he calls an Abraham alliance. What's your views on that, George?
Well, it's exactly what one would have expected. What he did in that address to Congress is to talk the language of the Americans, which was to tell them that our enemy is your enemy, our fight is your fight. Who's your enemy? Your enemy is terrorism. Your enemy is Islamic terrorism. And yes, and who embodies Islamic terrorism? Iran. And Iran wants to spread its Islamism all over the world. And this is music to the ears of many people in Congress, particularly the Republicans. So that's how he framed the issue. And then he said, well, we need to create this alliance, what he called, as he said, the Abraham alliance against Iran. And the analogy, obviously, the first one was in World War II, because he made all references to Churchill and the Grand Alliance against Hitler. And then he said, well, And then, then we transitioned after World War II to contain the aggressive, threatening Soviet Union. And that's what we need to do now against Iran. And they said the exemplar for this was what we did on April the 14th when Iran launched its attack. Of course, it didn't explain that missile attack on Israel was in retaliation for the Israeli attack on an Iranian consulate in Syria, but he just said it was out of the blue, this Iranian attack on Israel, and he said, okay, we did it. This huge multinational alliance against Iran, it let involve the United States, the United Kingdom, Jordan, and so on, and that's the model going forward, and that is music to the ears. Now, of course, it's completely ridiculous because, of course, there's no evidence at all that Iran is aggressive. This is simply nothing. Iran has been subjected to repeated attacks, chiefly sponsored by the United States, such as the Iran-Iraq War. That was in the days when Saddam Hussein was still in good odor in Washington. The United States encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Iran in 1979, and then, of course, we've had all the attacks by Israel against Iran. They've conducted numerous assassinations, but the notion that there is a kind of aggressive Islamism is so completely ridiculous and misconstrued, because the only people who actually do believe in spreading Islamism, spreading Sharia law, and inflicting that Islamist terror are creatures like ISIS. ISIS is a creation of the West. The United States, the United Kingdom created ISIS. That, we know that ISIS never conducts attacks against Israel. So this supposed threat, Islamist threat, never attacks Israel. So ISIS, they do capture places and do all of those horrific things, stoning women to death and the rest. But Iran has never done that. So again, what Netanyahu is doing is lying and deceiving, and the Americans are a little confused. One Islamist is pretty much like any other, and so Iran wants to spread the Sharia law all over the world. Netanyahu knew his audience, and he absolutely catered to it.
Yeah, you make some excellent points. And it was Edward Bernays, the father of PR, who said that the best way to rally anybody and the biggest human emotion is through fear. And the words that he used, it was the fighting call, wasn't it? When we fight Iran, we're fighting the most radical and murderous enemy of the United States. What's your view, Martin?
Yes, scaremongering and very the expertise of Netanyahu was very impressive. I mean, as George says, he knew his audience, and his intention was to stir up more fear, more hatred towards Iran. The reference to Iranians hanging gays from cranes, I thought was a bit of a cheap shot, because no one really was there to actually counter that by saying, well, Israel shoots dead journalists, with snipers, and throws into jail 9,000 Palestinians without even charging them, without even a court case against them. So to use the human rights thing was really cheap, and I just think it drew a line under the whole thing for me, that we were witnessing theatre, really theatre in its best form. I mean, when we talk about the military alliance, this is not a new idea. It's been around for quite some time. I was trying to look at my laptop this morning to look at some old articles from at least 5 or 6 years ago when I was writing about it. So it came up again during Trump's period, where Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was burning the midnight oil with Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh, drafting a blueprint to supposedly save the Middle East. And he called it the Arab NATO at that time. But I'm not sure that it has legs. I can't really see it going forward. I mean, it's very, very clear. It's been clear for a very long time, even since as long as the 1980s, that Netanyahu has wanted a war with Iran, but he never wanted to do it himself. He always wanted to use America's forces to go ahead with that, because the idea of Israel attacking Iran is just hilarious. I mean, they would just be blown off the surface of the world, within 24 hours. There'd be nothing left of Israel. Because what's not reported in Western press is how sophisticated and superior Iran's defense system is. And so, the Israelis have always dreamt this idea: if we could muster in enough people, enough partners in the region, the Saudis, perhaps the Emiratis, one or two other GCC countries, Egypt, Turkey, and perhaps even Morocco, to this NATO alliance, we might one day have the forces ready to strike Iran. But there is a huge division between the ideologies here. He's suggesting that America is the one that engineers all this. But America doesn't want to have a war with Iran. No American president, sane or otherwise, compos mentis or deranged, ever wanted to have a war with Iran. And that's really off the plantation. What the Americans might be looking at this, and other Arab partners might be looking at this scheme as is a similar sort of organization to NATO, which claims to be a defense organization. The Saudis are very, very vulnerable in the region to attacks from Houthis and from the Iranians. Both groups have actually sent Scud missiles to their oil facilities in the last few years. The last attack, I think, from Iran was in 2019. And so the Saudis would welcome any idea which created an effective defensive shield rather than Patriot missiles that the Americans have installed there, which don't work some of the time and didn't prove to be very effective, So they look at it as defensive. Iran looks at it as offensive. Iran wants the organization to be very much a warmonger. It wants to go to war with Iran. And, Israel wants it to go to war with Iran. And I can't see it happening. I can't see it getting off the page.
No, you're absolutely right, and it is important. That's one of the things that I love about the Muckrakers, is we do have time to unpack all these things. As you know, I also present a series called Fake or Fact, where we drill into the different claims that are made. And so I was having a look at some of the claims by Netanyahu in his speech, some of which are really quite abhorrent. He stated, for example, that Israel has allowed over 40,000 aid trucks into Gaza, providing more than 3,000 calories per person per day. The fact, however, is that aid agencies dispute the effectiveness of these numbers. We've seen footage of people who are starving, and they've noted issues with distribution, the mixing of commercial goods with humanitarian aid. I was also looking at the Rafah death toll. Netanyahu claimed minimum civilian deaths in Rafah. He cited an incident with a Hamas depot, but again, there are reports indicate multiple airstrikes in Rafah rather. They've caused significant civilian casualties, including women and men. And he's also talked about the combat to civilian casualty ratio. He says it's been the lowest ratio of civilian to combat casualties ever. But again, experts and sources challenge this, suggesting a higher civilian death toll, with about 70% being women and children. And finally, when he was talking about the protesters outside, he said, look, Iran are funding all these US protesters. He says that it's all completely fake. Everybody loves us, really. And the reality is the US intelligence, they acknowledge some attempts by Iran, but clarify that most protesters are acting independently. What's your take on all these? Well, they're effectively lies, aren't they, George?
Well, they are indeed lies. And of course, when he makes these kind of declarations about civilian to combatants ratios, well, how do we judge that? We have to judge, well, how many combatants have you killed? And of course, Israel has never really given any kind of an estimate of how many Hamas fighters that it's killed. And this war has now been going on for 10 months, and Hamas seems to be in pretty good shape. So basically, they haven't really killed that many Hamas fighters. So the overwhelming majority of the casualties have been civilian casualties. And, this has just been the Israeli propaganda, which is to say somehow, oh, we're killing all these Hamas fighters. Well, who are they? Where are they? Because everyone is witnessing all the women and the children that have been killed, all these camps that have been destroyed. And so, all of this is a lie. And then, of course, Israel has its propagandists who tell us that Israel is so meticulous, it goes out of its way to avoid any civilian casualties. People like Alan Dershowitz will say this, there never has there been a military force that has been so determined to observe the rules of international humanitarian law. Of course, it's absolute rubbish. There's never been a military force that has been as brutal in its war making as Israel, and they just compare it to other countries. Compare the war in Ukraine, for instance. Now, the war in Ukraine is, of course, terrible in itself. However, we have clear ideas of how many civilian casualties have been and how many military casualties, and you can say, well, that's a war in which the overwhelming majority of the casualties have been military casualties, combatants rather than civilians. And then let's think of an example like the British in Ireland during the Troubles. Again, the British didn't go off and say, we've had it with the IRA. We're going to go and bomb Dublin. I mean, we're just going to go straight in and bomb Ireland because, above all, we need to crush the IRA and crush the threat from terrorism. Nobody does it. Nobody does what Israel does, which is essentially attack all its neighbors, which it does on a regular basis, always has done throughout its history, attack all its neighbors, attack civilians in all of its neighbors, and then it justifies it by, of course, invoking the Holocaust. Never again, never again, never again. Therefore, we can do whatever we like, however brutally, however cruel, because we can never have another Holocaust. So that's it. You can just, justify the most horrific crimes because, of course, we have to save the Jewish people.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. Well, we're going to look a bit more at those claims and debunk some of them, and also talk a bit more about propaganda as a weapon of war. I always say that the first casualty in war is the truth. We'll be back after these messages.
Our beautiful world is changing, withering, dying by the hands of those who don't value nature, even though we all depend on it for life itself. But there is hope. Together with caring friends, the Nature Conservancy can restore our lands, heal our waters, and save our wildlife with big solutions only nature can provide. But every day we lose more of the places we love, and we urgently need to save endangered lands, waters, and wild species. The actions we take today will determine the tomorrow we leave to our children and grandchildren. The water they drink, the air they breathe, the beauty they experience. To learn more about how you can help protect and conserve our beautiful world, visit nature.org today.
The Light is Britain's far-right conspiracy theory paper spreading hate and vicious lies. No, that's what the BBC say. The Light is the only national newspaper bringing you the real news and informed opinion on what's really going on today. You can subscribe, order copies, submit articles, and read back issues on our website, thelightpaper.co.uk, and see for yourself why the establishment are so worried about the uncensored truth getting out to people every month. The Light Paper. Not far right, just right so far. thelightpaper.co.uk.
Tracking global corruption and threats that undermine our security. This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. A very special edition today. It's our 50th Muckraker, and I'm joined by Martin J. and Dr. George Samueli. It's great to have them both. We're looking at Netanyahu's speech to Congress and debunking some of the claims that he's made within a general thing about propaganda and how that's being used as a weapon of war. I want to quote a couple of examples. I mentioned just before the break some of the things he claimed. Netanyahu, one of the most abhorrent ones of all, perhaps, is he's dismissed allegations of starving Gazans, and he turns around and says it's nonsense. Well, the actual fact seems there's been a complete siege has led to severe food shortages. We've seen the horrendous images. 96%, that's 96% of Gaza's population are facing critical food insecurity. He's also accused Hamas of stealing aid, basically meant for Gaza residents. And again, looking at the sort of facts from what I can see and others have reported, while there are some reports of looting, the extent of Hamas's involvement remains unclear and lacks specific evidence. What's your opinion on all of this, Martin?
Well, I take it with a pinch of salt. I look at it in exactly the same light as other wild allegations, which I have looked into. At the beginning of the war, we had reports in Western press of babies being raped and people being beheaded. And these were repeated by all sorts of top people. And they gained a certain traction. And even dare I say it, leading journalists in the UK like Douglas Murray, are still repeating it today, but it's all been disproved. Absolute nonsense, complete fabrication. And another example, just a few weeks ago, we had one of my journalists on Levantis.me was writing about UNRWA, which is the United Nations Palestinian-owned aid agency, and very recently they were accused by the Israelis of